Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this is the first panel session of 2025 NACIF conference. So the topic is understanding Islamic finance and the role of Waqf. And we have a tremendous group of scholars on stage. Some ground rule before we start. So I have sent a series of questions already, 3 questions to all of the panel members. And I want you to limit yourself to the question that has been asked so that we do develop a sort of coherent conversation going forward. So let me just an introductory after it is done. Hopefully we'll have time for question and answer from the audience. And also I will conclude the panel with the main message. So this high-level panel brings together leading Islamic finance scholars and practitioners to examine how Waqf, or Islamic endowment, can serve as a sustainable and ethical mechanism to address global humanitarian crisis. Our discussion or deliberation will focus on the integration of Waqf into modern financial systems, its role in promoting social solidarity, and its potential to provide innovative solutions for poverty alleviation, education, and healthcare. We are experts spanning from academia, Sharia advisory, and practice. The panel will offer diverse perspectives on governance, legal framework, and the future of Waqf in a rapidly changing financial landscape. So we will have 3 rounds of questions. I'm going to stand here because I feel sleepy if I sit there. So I can listen very carefully, focus. So I'll start with our first panelist with the first question, Joe. From a Sharia perspective, how can classical rulings on Waqf be adapted to meet the needs of modern Muslim communities in the West?
Bismillah. To answer the question, I think that there's really not much that needs to be done in the way of adaptation. What really needs to be is just implementation. The classical rules of Waqf for most of the Islamic legal schools had to do with immovable property. Granting that or ceding that immovable property into the Waqf and allowing it to then generate income, which would then be used for the beneficiaries of that Waqf. Of course, the scholars of our Hanafi school have the cash Waqf concept, which is probably more instituted in the US or in the West in general than it is in classical Waqf environments. Regardless, the rules for all of these things are the same. There should be clear grantor. There should be clear trustees. There should be a caretaker of that Waqf, and there should be clear distributions to beneficiaries. So I don't think that there's an issue necessarily in the rules of Waqf having to adapt. It's really just an issue of how can we efficiently implement them and meet the needs of the causes and the people that are the beneficiaries of those Waqf.
Thank you, Joe. So now I move to second panelist, Abdul Samad. So the question for you, what practical steps can policymakers and regulators take to create an enabling legal environment for Waqf institutions in North America?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much for the question. I think the list is long. What steps can policymakers take and regulators take to create an environment for Waqf institutions? So I think taking a step back, I think the foremost thing that we need to question is what we're doing with regards to raising awareness and education. So I teach courses on Muslim philanthropy and leadership. So through Indiana University, we have collaborated with different Islamic high schools. And when I asked the question in a class of 40 students or 30 students, how many of you know what a Waqf is? I hardly receive any answer as to what Waqf is, right? And if we go back, if I ask what is the largest Waqf organization in the United States? Even in this room, I don't know if everyone can answer this question, and the hope is not. That was a product of students who created the Muslim Student Association in the US and in Canada. That is the largest Waqf organization that we have. So I think education is at the forefront, raising awareness. How can we bring more legitimacy to the concept of Waqf? And through our collaboration with the nonprofits that are in existence, and how can we create a narrative around Waqf, that how it adds to the social impact. I think part of the reason that part of the solution that we want to create is how can we serve these communities in the society we live in? So how can we rally together? And I think the place is how can we come to some platforms to discuss these issues. I'm just going to stop here.
Thank you, Brother Abdul Samad. Now I move to Professor Paolo Biancon. He came all the way from Italy. So the question for you, the first one, in your research, I know, by the way, he is the father and mother of Islamic Finance in Italy, if you don't know him. So I'm glad that you were able to join us. So in your research, what global case studies stand out where Waqf was successfully addressed humanitarian or development challenges?
Okay, thank you for the question. It's a great pleasure to be here. Waqf has always been more than a religious institution. It's an early model of social welfare and sustainable asset management. Historically, it provided education, healthcare, and infrastructure long before the modern welfare state. I want to underline three main examples in the years. The first one, Al-Azhar University in Egypt. It's one of the oldest universities in the world, still operating thanks to its Waqf endowment. For centuries, Waqf revenue has financed education, scholarship, and academic continuity, show how perpetual social investment can sustain public good without fiscal burden. The second one is Malaysia's corporate and cash Waqf models through Yayasan Wakaf Malaysia. Corporate entities and banks manage Waqf fund to build hospital, affordable housing, and school. This model integrates professional management, accountability, and financial innovation, transforming Waqf from charity to sustainable social fund. The last one is Indonesia Cash Waqf Linked Sukuk, that is a creative hybrid instrument combining Waqf and Sukuk. Citizens invest a small amount, return go to social program, and the principal remain dedicated to Waqf. This aligns Islamic finance tools with social impact financial inclusion. These cases show Waqf as a living institute, flexible, scalable, and compatible with contemporary financial system. Thanks.
Thank you, Paulo. Now let me move to Dr. Ala Guedera. So the first question that I have for you, how can Waqf be linked with ESG, environmental, social, and governance framework to appeal to global ethical investors?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So great questions. How Waqf could be linked with ESG to attract more ethical investor. First of all, I think we need to ask ourselves, what do we mean by ethical investors? Do we mean here just people or investors aligned with ESG? Do we mean Islamic investors, or do we mean other frameworks? That will lead me to the second question. So I'm just going to provide a few questions, then go back and answer your question, Dr. Kabir. The second question, if we're relying into ESG framework, which kind of ESG? Are we referring to this ESG framework that we currently have with all of the drawbacks we're seeing? Let me cite a few examples. A company right now has or may have higher ESG score if it's more friendly with the LGBTQ community, under the umbrella of diversity, gender, and all of this narrative. Is this the ESG we're looking for? Second example, MSCI. MSCI recently, after the genocide in Gaza, they actually canceled all of their downgrade for the companies that actually have some human right breach in Gaza. So let's say you're a company, you can, if you're doing the same breach in Gaza and you're doing this in the US, if you're doing in this US, you'll be penalized. If you're doing this in Gaza, you're not penalized. This is MSCI. This is Sustainalytics. Is that the ESG that we're talking about? So I don't think so. So I think, first of all, we need to define which ESG framework we're looking for and how that might attract ethical investors. So to sum up and not taking too much time, I think we need to rely on our Islamic ESG, a new framework. I know earlier I got one student here who was looking for opportunities. That's one of the opportunities, guys, is jumping into an Islamic ESG framework. Go and do it. Let's develop this. You have a lot of academic researcher here, institutions, business schools. Let's do that. We don't have an appropriate Islamic ESG framework. Even though that's not complicated, we can just simply play on the weights, cancel whatever doesn't fit with our system, gender, all of this, cancel that and bring our own ESG. So to just answer your question, Dr. Kabir, is Waqf linked, or how Waqf might be linked with ESG? Waqf, as we mentioned, capital preserved, invested in Sharia compliance, and the income generated is reinvested. Obviously, if we talk about Islamic ESG, that will be very correlated with the ESG that we're looking for, and therefore that will be very beneficial for Waqf investors. So let's go back, redefine ESG according to our own standards, and I think we should be able to answer this question.
Okay, thank you. Actually, what I meant, I'll come back to you this, I was saying that ethical investors, whatever platform they come from, Islamic, non-Islamic, Abrahamic faith, because the Gen Z generation, actually many of them, even Muslim, and it's one of the alarming things that they are not really practicing, but they believe in some supernatural power. They consider themselves Muslim. So I'm talking about these people without any value judgment attached to it. Of course, ESG, the way it is, I mean, Islamic finance ESG to begin with. So we don't want to get into this debate to begin with. Now, let me move to Maurice Hadjik. By the way, I met him in Bosnia in one of the conferences at a university which was created by Waqf, Islamic University of Bosnia. And then I found out he's from the United States. So since then, he's from Turkey. I know. He's from Turkey?
I studied in Turkey, but I'm from Bosnia.
Yeah, he's Bosnian, man. You think everyone is Turkish. Anyway, then started working together. MashaAllah, he has a very good empirical skill set. So we have a couple of papers, and tomorrow we are going to present one. So he has graciously asked at the last minute at my request to sit as a panel member. So first question that you have, how do you see Waqf fitting into the broader spectrum of Sharia-compliant financial products?
All right, thank you for that question. Just to say, I'm very humbled to be in the shoes of Sheikh Yusuf Di Lorenzo, big shoes to fill. But out of respect, I decided to sit here and give my answers to these questions. So I don't have a Sharia background. My background is in finance, but I have done some recent work related to Waqf. And I come from a country, Bosnia, which was part of Ottoman Empire, where entire cities, including our capital, were funded by Waqf, which exists to this very day. So I went to Waqf-funded schools in Bosnia, in Turkey to an extent, in the United States, depending on how you look at it. So I have benefited from Waqf in many ways. In Bosnia, Waqf has been and still is primarily real estate funded. There's an actual real estate, and the rents, yield that come from that rents are really those, that income that funds the Waqf. But that model has survived for many years because the very center of the capital and big cities in Bosnia, which are Waqf, they are profitable, to use that terminology, so the Waqf sustains and survives till this date. In the modern times, how does Waqf fit into the current spectrum of Sharia-compliant products? My view, and to an extent experience, is that we should use as many of Sharia-compliant products and instruments in the financial markets in the US and globally for Waqf. And my research partly touches upon that, and my research was informed partly because of my experience with one fintech that deals with this. And what they did, this is a fintech that's really from Bosnia, but it was established in the United States for legal reasons. They are really leveraging the US financial markets, stock markets, to create sustainable cash Waqf. So all the donations are invested in the US financial markets for the benefit of initiatives and causes across the world. So, and my research tomorrow will talk about that. So my view is whatever solutions we have. So from screening stocks and having those Sharia stock screeners, use those so we know what investments are feasible for Waqf. So we can have cash Waqf invested in those stocks. Whether the examples brought by Professor Paolo, the cash Waqf or Sukuk-linked cash Waqf or Waqf that is funded through donated shares, whatever the tools are, as long as the underlying instrument is halal, I think we should use this and more innovative products that will be developed to support Waqf, because that's the only way to make those Waqfs more sustainable, that they can be linked to liquid assets. So we have not just sustainability and longevity, we also have a tool which allows us to meet immediate needs through that Waqf, which real estate definitely does not do or can have difficulty doing as an illiquid asset class. I hope that's a good answer to the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was good enough. Maurice, so let me move back to Joe again. He doesn't like to be called Sheikh Joe Bradford. Again, Joe, your second question for you, what safeguards should be in place to ensure that Waqf remains compliant with the Sharia while adopting innovative financial models?
Yes, every time I hear my full name, I think my mom, I'm in trouble with my mom, so first name is always best. So what Maurice had mentioned, I think we can really build on that. There are standards for investments. The IOFI standards are one of the more famous ones. You have others for accounting and operations, IFSB and others. Those should definitely be put into play for creating a sound investment policy for a Waqf. Another thing that's a must is a management policy, and there should be some trusteeship in which the trustees are auditing and are familiar with Sharia-compliant investments in order to audit the investments that the management makes. There also needs to be a very important part that I think, in my limited experience, has been left out of the formation of endowments or trusts, especially here in the United States, North America, and South America, and that is a policy for the discharge of the Waqf when it is no longer utilized or able to be utilized. And what I've seen is that, for example, the Waqf assets would be distributed to people freely, or they would be transferred to a sister organization. That sister organization may not actually be fulfilling the same intention and benefiting the same beneficiaries as the original Waqf. So a discharge policy of what happens with this wealth, how can it actually be put towards the causes of the original grantors to the Waqf is extremely important as well. But those three things, management, investment policy, and audit, I think are the keys for having a professionally, faithfully run Waqf.
I think there is a term from the US trust law where, the original purpose is gone, so you can change it to alternative uses. And I think we can also introduce that in the Islamic Waqf system as well, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
I did want to mention one thing. Our brother Ala had mentioned ESG. Dr. Amin Al-Bashir of ICD at the ISDB. He is working on a project on ESG right now. If anyone wants to follow up with him in his research, he's the author of Risk Management in Islamic Finance. And so his current, when I last spoke with him, his current project is working on, and he says, look, our Sharia compliance standards are actually better and more developed than ESG. But we use ESG because it's the term that's there. But I wanted to put everyone on to that.
I just add one more thing. So those who work in the ESG empirical work that we do, there are 6 vendors to sell the product, ESG scoring, and there is very little correlation among the 6 vendors. If you look at this, all the credit rating agency, S&P, Fitch, you heard about this, their credit rating is almost 90% correlation. But ESG different vendors is about anywhere between 20 to 30%. So having said this, what constitutes ESG? Like for me as a Muslim investor, LGBT probably is not a major concern, but environment. So that debate exists, but for this type of thing, we need young scholars with empirical setting, because data-driven work probably tells the story. We have to really get to this from preaching to practicing. We are very good in preaching in Muslim world, but not practicing. We really need to practice and show through example what Islam says good for everyone. Now coming back to Brother Abdul Samad, your second question, how can Waqf be mobilized to support financial inclusion and reduce wealth inequality in the underserved Muslim communities here or elsewhere?
Sure. I think that's a very important question. And there have been books written to answer this question, I think. Sustainability, I think, is a focal point for the Waqf system. But I think we need to, as I mentioned in the previous question that you asked, there is the lack of knowledge and awareness. I think in this regard, there is also the challenge of management of Waqf system. The laws that we have, they are kind of outdated. Yes, we have some best practices in Indonesia, in Malaysia, even in Singapore, that is not a Muslim majority context. How we can build upon those best practices, how we can build upon those practices and bring those to the light so that we can learn from them. But then I think even now the questions here asked, like, what is a Waqf? What are the practices to manage a Waqf? Who is a mutawalli? What is the role of the mutawalli in the US context? But even beyond, I think, if we talk about Pakistan, so we did these reports, philanthropy in Pakistan. I shared with you philanthropy in Bangladesh, philanthropy in Turkey, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. And we're doing more reports. We'll be doing one in India, in Africa. So if you look at the context of Pakistan, contributions to Waqf in Pakistan are not very common. 76% of the people that we surveyed, they have never contributed to any Waqf, which means they don't know if they can contribute to a Waqf or not. The case in Jordan, 96% of the people who responded to our surveys never contributed to any Waqf. 4% did. Maybe that's a different context. Kuwait, 61% mentioned they did not contribute to any Waqf. 39% they said they did. And I think if we ask the same question in the US, we'll be alarmed, because what are the Waqf system that we know in the US in this context? And then that starts like the potential of Waqf. We know, we have heard people, and then we say that that's just there. I was talking to Dr. Yusuf yesterday, and we discussed capitalism has failed us, communism has failed us, Islamic social finance is the way forward, and the tools that we talked about, including zakat, waqf, sadaqah, and the list goes on. There is the untapped potential, but then the question is, in the Muslim majority context, this has not worked. It did not solve the problem. So the Waqf has failed. So how we can bring that? So I think there are examples, good examples that we can build upon, but we really need to work on management of it, updating the laws, and just reviving that kind of knowledge and practice of Waqf.
Thank you. So we have 2 children, they're grown up. When they're grown up, we replace them with 2 cats. And every time I go to Turkey, I think Turkey, Istanbul is a city of cats. So the reason I'm bringing this up, I'm sure somebody has done a Waqf many times ago, because every time when you teach a course in Waqf, we bring the history of Turkey, Ottoman Empire, and they have done very well, and still it plays a very critical role in Turkish education system and philanthropic sector. Right. So coming back to another old civilization, Roman, where our friend Paulo is coming from. So how can international collaboration between Muslim and non-Muslim countries enhance the global practice of Waqf?
So global collaboration is essential if Waqf is to become an universal model of social asset management. Muslim and non-Muslim countries can work together to bring ethical and faith-based principles into mainstream of sustainable finance. We need three important element: standardization and interoperability by developing shared governance standard, reporting templates, and impact metrics. Waqf institution can engage international investor, regulator, and rating agency. Transparency builds comparability, and comparability builds trust. Second, co-creation of hybrid instrument. Collaboration can lead to financial products that blend Islamic principle with the ESG framework, such as Waqf-linked social bond or green sukuk with Waqf components. This bridge Islamic social finance with global impact investment markets. The third one, academic and research cooperation. For example, journals like the European Journal of Islamic Finance, that is the journal that we founded 10 years ago, that provide open access platform that connects scholars from different backgrounds, can be a useful instrument to develop such kind of research. International cooperation transform Waqf from a regional tradition into a global ethical finance model. When Muslim and non-Muslim institutions share governance, innovation, and evidence, Waqf become not only a charitable legacy, but a catalyst for sustainable and inclusive growth worldwide. Thanks.
Thank you, Paulo. Now let me move to Dr. Ala. The question for you: what lessons can we draw from historical Waqf institution in the Muslim world that remain relevant for today's financial challenges?
Thank you, Dr. Kabir. Maybe let's go back to the first Waqf ever founded, the Waqf of Uthman radiallahu anh. So this Waqf is still up and running, and I think there are so many lessons we can take out of this. I think number one, the governance. So this Waqf would never be continued until today if there was no good governance, across time. Nowadays, it's part of the Awqaf Ministry of Saudi Arabia, but I guess it's a whole process since it was incepted during the prophetic period. So governance, I think, and best rules and best practice in terms of governance is the first lesson we can take out of this. Another and a second maybe lesson is the sustainability. So I think it's really a reflection of how it survived from generation to generation. That's exactly part of the sustainability definition. So with sustainability, we need to make our awqaf sustainable on a certain way. And maybe the third and last lesson here is transparency. So since day one, the Muslim was informed that they can get water from the well of Uthman, not from the Jewish person. So there was a clear standards on how the Waqf operated from day one. So transparent, this is simple, sorry to make it very simple here for academic purposes, but I think it has a lot of sense. So it was very transparent from day one. So to sum up, good governance, sustainability, and transparency are most of the lessons we can take out of the story of Uthman, well, the first ever Waqf built in Islam.
Thank you. Since you mentioned Saudi Arabia, I did a consulting work for Waqf Authority of Saudi Arabia. So they are trying to take a stock taking what is the size of the Waqf in Saudi Arabia. Written Waqf, those are recorded, is $450 billion. And unwritten one that I was told, because Waqf can be with word, is over $1 trillion. But the question is how you make this Waqf to generate more returns so that can be distributed. And that's where the big gap. With that, I want to come to now Dr. Maurice, is what are the key Sharia issues that must be addressed when Waqf assets are invested in contemporary financial markets?
Let me just start with a personal example. So a few years ago, I was the president of one of the Bosnian masjid Islamic centers in Chicago, and we were doing this exact thing. Let's set up a Waqf or an endowment in the American context. And we had everything, the investment policy, the discharge policy wasn't called that, but everything was on paper, looked perfectly. And when this was supposed to be signed, the board changed. I wasn't the president anymore. Somebody else came, the new board, and nothing ever happened to that. They actually did not like the idea. So going back to the question with Waqf, and this one wasn't initiated officially, so that wasn't an issue, but the main things we need to keep in mind is continuity. Waqf, we're talking about perpetual Waqf for the most part, I assume here. We need to establish and maintain that perpetuity, that continuity. That needs to be one of the main things that Waqf needs to preserve. Since it begins, it needs to continue. In terms of basic sort of Sharia, the underlying asset that the Waqf will invest needs to be Sharia compliant. The cause, the impact that the Waqf is making needs to be Sharia compliant. So we cannot have a Waqf fund support LGBT causes. So those are the basics that I think everybody understands. But the issue of continuity, of trust, transparency, governance, and ultimately impact, the causes that we invest in, those are the issues which are directly Sharia related or indirectly related to Sharia that we need to establish and maintain. So one issue of, because I personally went through that, the issue of the discharge. We came to the situation, we had a very small Waqf, food pantry, that again, this new board wanted to end for valid reasons, but then you have a problem. What do you do with the Waqf? Because the donations made were for perpetual use. The donors were promised certain things on paper, legally, so they can sue if they want. So we made sure that we transferred the Waqf to another Waqf with very similar mission to the satisfaction of every single donor. Luckily, this was a small sort of pilot initiative, and it worked well. But that's the thing, how do you make sure you have a Waqf that will continue once people who established that have passed away, once maybe the Islamic center of the masjid you established for that Waqf, maybe legally something changes, maybe the location changes. How does that continuity continue with trust and transparency? So transparency is another thing. The donors need to have information about how their donation or whatever the form of the Waqf is, how it's doing. And I think that's probably one of the bigger issues throughout history and now still to an extent when it comes to Waqf. There's not a lot of transparency, which causes issue with the trust, with the governance. So I think those core principles need to be maintained, need to be established from day one and tied directly to Sharia principles. And if that is maintained, I think the Waqf as an institution will persevere, will sustain, will become bigger. It will allow us to do all the things that we want. The SDG goals can be done through Waqf, but we need to take care of these core principles, inshallah.
Thank you, Dr. Maurice. Finally, I'm coming back to Joe again, the last and final set of questions. How do you view the balance between preserving traditional charitable spirit of Waqf and using it for income-generating or investment purposes?
So I think we have to define what we mean by traditional spirit of Waqf. I have many times found that there's a misnomer that something is non-profit or it's Waqf, or it's working for the benefit of the community, or it's fi sabilillah, or it's sabil or infaq, or any of the terms that we use, that this somehow means that it cannot be successful, it cannot be profitable, and it cannot have its own business purpose. If it is a nonprofit, well, how are you going to charge for this event? You're a nonprofit. You should be making no profit. You're a nonprofit. But that's not what that means. Similarly, a waqf, the spirit of the waqf is to generate income. That's the purpose of the waqf, is to be either immovable property or cash that is used expressly to create value, which is then transferred to specific beneficiaries. And I think one of the biggest challenges for actually using or reviving that traditional sense of waqf is the management structure and the independence of management. So you were mentioning the Islamic Center starting a waqf. That at least here in the United States, there was a time when we needed one umbrella organization that essentially did everything because numbers were so small. Now, we've seen that when you have the masjid who owns the masjid who starts the school, who also has the food pantry, who also does zakat distribution, who also is doing matrimony, who also has a soccer team, who also is trying to do small businesses, those types of things, when they're all underneath one umbrella, one roof, they become muddled. And you can see, I think, the independence of, say, for example, Islamic schools from masjid boards have shown that those Islamic schools are much more successful than the ones who are not being run by educators. A waqf should be run by people who are professional, and one of the professionals, and it would be very successful and then able to create that money that's then going to give back to the same masjid that it came from. It might be the same people, but it should be a separate entity. And one thing that I've noticed, and I've actually been approached by a number of communities, is they have a problem of changing boards. And so when you consistently have elections and people know that religious institutions, Islamic centers and such, have large balance sheets, there can be an ulterior motive to get on the board. So the donors are saying, well, how do we control the faucet? And the idea is, instead of having, let's give our money to the mosque and then have the mosque create a waqf, it is, no, let's create a Friends of the Mosque waqf, where we put our money and then we control the faucet. We can turn it on. Oh, the masjid is doing things that are not in the best interest of the community. Then we were established as Friends of the Mosque, or as Friends of the Islamic Community, Friends of the Islamic School. That allows the waqf to actually not just work as a revenue generating engine for the community, but to really become the third independent economic driver that it really should be, and that it was in many Muslim majority lands until many of the awqaf were nationalized.
Just to add what Joe said, so the intention of my question was that when you do portfolio optimization, as you said, the professional manager, they look at the risk-return trade-off and what is the best set of assets you should invest in. And the second point of transparency that Maurice was mentioning, Islamic finance is the most non-transparent industry. If you want to get some data to do some empirical work, nobody wants to share the data with you. I don't know why. So we really have to, even Central Bank of Malaysia, I tried to get some data, showing the relationship between the conventional interest rate, their product and Islamic. In 2 years, I ran after them. In the name of secrecy, I never got this data. I'm just saying this not because they have an issue with everything. So even like if you want to do some work, anything in the United States and the Western world, you need data. They will be more willing to give you the data because they benefit from it. We really need to change our mindset. Coming back to Brother Abdul Samad, last question for you. What role do partnership between Islamic institutions and mainstream nonprofits play in scaling up Waqf's impact?
Sure. I think partnerships are crucial because they combine religious legitimacy with expertise that we need on an operational basis and brings in the broader network. I think we remain guided that being part of the solution is beloved to Allah. And Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned the best of the people are those who are helpful to the people. So in this regard, I think the mainstream nonprofit brings expertise, maybe in compliance. We are still talking about, I was talking to brother, I'm sorry, I forget your name, Mufti will be Yusuf, that we still need to create narratives and get better at impact measurement. So these nonprofits, I think they bring a lot of value in evaluation, fundraising, and all of those other needs that we need. One of the studies that I want to mention, they reviewed almost 700 some articles starting 1914 up until 2024. And they were evaluating Waqf models since this whole time frame. And they underscored two important things. One, they said, if you want to look at better and impactful Waqf management, so look at the model in Malaysia. That was top ranked. The second thing they underscored was the importance of collaborative authorship. So that means we want to make sure we bring in the practitioners, religious scholars, people who are leaders in the community, who are theologians or academics, and bring this knowledge and then create that knowledge together. I think that is the essence I think that we need to work on and focus on.
Thank you, Abdul. Now back to Professor Paulo. So last question for you. What governance frameworks are necessary to ensure transparency, accountability, and efficiency in Waqf management?
Governance is the cornerstone of Waqf renewal. A modern Waqf must remain faithfully to its legal roots while adopting contemporary standards of transparency, performance, and accountability. I think the most important point are corporate governance principles, defining clear rules for managers, trustees, and beneficiaries, establish external auditing, conflict of interest policies, and regular public reporting. Transparency must become for value, not a constraint. Impact measurement and financial stewardship. Behind the financial statement, Waqf institutions should disclose social outcome, number of students educated, health care provided, or housing unit delivered. This reinforces donor confidence and policy relevance. The last, professional management and innovation, with policies similar to an investment fund, asset allocation, liquidity management, and the sustainability screening. Modern Waqf act as a social asset manager, aligning traditional objectives with the SDGs. Strong governance transforms Waqf from a static endowment into a dynamic engine of development. The formula is simple, rigid in value, flexible in management. That balance between perpetuity and professionalism ensure Waqf can serve humanity effectively in the 21st century. Thanks.
Thank you, Paulo. I know Dr. Allah has published one of the top journals in finance, Journal Bank and Finance. So last question for you. How can empirical research help policymakers and practitioners design more effective Waqf-based interventions in modern economies?
The beauty actually with empirical research, they are evidence-based. So there is no room for jeopardizing insights, I think. So it's all evidence-based. And I think one of the reasons why Western civilizations actually has influence on the whole system is, those think tank, those, research that are based on data that will make the difference. So number one, how empirical research actually are making the difference and making more effective Waqf-based model. It's the evidence-based and not the intuition and the insights. Number two is actually measuring the impact. So with data, I can measure the impact. Again, no room for jeopardizing. I know exactly if I'm doing this, most likely I will get this result. So that will make the management process more effective. Number three, if I'm not mistaken, there is the use of technology. So now with empirical research, we can leverage the technology. Now we're talking about predictive AI. Honestly, I haven't used it in my research, but we're talking about a huge technological advancements on that, and I think that will make our model more reliable, and that will make our Waqf-based model more effective. So I think those at least three good things about empirical research that we can leverage for Waqf-based model.
Thank you. Finally, Dr. Maurice. So I live in Louisiana, and Louisiana is a red state. So the mosque story that I was mentioning in the morning, we tried to collect money for international donors. So we are told for certain countries we cannot receive money. And one of the country which I know gives a lot of philanthropy is Saudi Arabia. So that brings the question for you, Maurice, because you do a cross-sectional or cross-country. How can Waqf institutions navigate cross-border challenges while maintaining Sharia integrity in diverse regulatory context?
So this is a difficult issue, or can be a difficult issue. To give one example, a few years ago, we tried, as an Islamic center, there was a collection of donations to send to Syria, and we used PayPal at that time. And that account was frozen, ultimately ended up being frozen for 2 years because the money was going to Syria, and Syria at that time was, in problems, and that money was stuck, not benefiting anybody for almost 2 years until it was unfrozen. So there can be a lot of issue with cross-border movements of money of any kind. So Waqf institutions need to be very mindful of that and do everything by the book. So any tax regulatory body, IRS in the US, will be on top of these cross-border capital movements. So that's the first thing. You need to abide by whatever the local regulation, and usually this is related to tax, to dot all the T's, cross all the I's. Second, I believe that Waqf institutions should behave in a way, quote unquote, like capitalists, meaning their own capital, their own assets should, if they're intended for cross-border movement, they should search for yield, to use the finance term. In other words, they should try to maximize those Waqf assets. In other words, to give example of my own country, Bosnia, if you wanted to establish a cash Waqf, you really have no options. You can only put it in real estate. You can put it in an interest-based bank account, which obviously does not work. You can put it in the stock market. Even though we have 2 stock exchanges, it's extremely illiquid. It's junk. It shouldn't be, for Waqf purposes, for sustainability, continuity, it's a suicide. So what to do then? Look for other opportunities. Go to cross-border, look at cross-border opportunities. So whether that's Germany, whether that's London, whether it's Istanbul, Hong Kong, United States, look for other avenues, I'm talking specifically for cash Waqf, to invest those assets, to grow those assets in established liquid financial markets, liquid legal markets and venues, if that's a possibility. And from my own experience, I know that's a possibility. So to give another example, I made a donation to an institution that helps nonprofits establish Waqfs from across the world, and they leverage the US financial markets through that. So whether the actual nonprofit who wants to establish Waqf is in Bosnia, is in Turkey, is in Austria, they can leverage, among other things, the US, the most liquid financial market, stock market in particular, and grow their assets in a Sharia-compliant way. So I donated for orphan. It was an orphan fund that I donated to. and it was an amount, small amount, but what happened is this fund showed fruits. It solved a problem in a way before there was a problem. What do I mean by that? In Bosnia 2 years ago, there were huge floods in one small city, small village, but it took out the entire village. And of the few families that were there, few of them had small kids, and 2 kids were orphans. This fund was able to immediately support those orphans with all their needs, educational, clothing, food, because the fund was there, established, it was growing their funds, it was growing their assets, and it had income established such that it was immediately able to fund and support those 2 orphans. This was Bosnia to America, America to Bosnia fund movement. But this institution did everything they could. They respected the regulatory bodies, IRS in particular, in the US and SEC. They established their sister organization here, which allowed them access to US legal framework and financial markets. And the flow of money was easy after you sort of did all the paperwork. So to summarize this question, Waqf institutions can navigate these challenges. Nowadays, we have the entire crypto asset class, so the cross-border movement should be easier, at least in paper, but I think in practical sense too. So Waqf institutions should look to leverage these crypto routes, crypto assets, to also move funds to the extent it's possible and it's allowed. But even without that, if you respect the local regulatory laws, and Waqf as a Sharia-compliant institution, if you internally respect your Sharia rules, you should be able to achieve the best goals in terms of achieving high returns for your Waqf, which achieves sustainability. And if you, going back to previous questions, if you match that with transparency, because you're doing a lot of things, money moving borders, you need to make sure that transparency is 100%, then trust will be established, and I think this will bring longevity to these Waqf institutions.
So I think we have almost very close to the end of our time. Yeah, so let me just summarize as I take the... So there are 5 takeaways from this deliberation. Number 1, Waqf as a bridge between tradition and modernity. Today's discussion highlighted that Waqf remains one of the most enduring institutions in Islamic civilization, yet its adaptability to modern context, whether through digital platforms, legal reforms, or integration with global finance, shows that it can be both timeless and timely. Second point, governance and transparency is central. Across our panelists' insights, one theme resonated. The success of Waqf institution depends not just on noble intentions, but also on strong governance, transparency, and accountability. Without this, trust is lost and the impact is diminished. Third point, empowering communities locally and globally. We heard how Waqf can support education, healthcare, poverty alleviation, and disaster relief, not only in Muslim-majority countries, but also in Western societies. This demonstrates its universal relevance as a tool for financial inclusion and social solidarity. Fourth point, innovation and Sharia integrity must go hand in hand. Panelists reminded us that while new financial models and technologies like crypto, blockchain, or ESG framework offer exciting opportunities, they must always remain anchored in Sharia principles. Innovation should serve as a vehicle, not as a compromise. And final point, collaboration is the key to scale up, whether through partnerships between Islamic and conventional institutions or international cooperation across jurisdictions. Waqf's impact can only be maximized if we move beyond silos and work together for common humanitarian goals. So as we conclude, Waqf is more than a financial institution. It is a living embodiment of Islamic values of justice, compassion, and shared prosperity. Our task as scholars, practitioners, and community leaders is to revive its spirit while adapting its form to the needs of our time. I thank our distinguished panelists for their wisdom and all of you for your engagement. Let us continue this conversation and, more importantly, translate this into action. Thank you very much. Thank you.